As I mentioned to you on Slack, I thought to live stream only the part where we will study these two images because they are applicable to anyone. They're really a very good introduction to this type of teaching. And I'd like to start with a quotation from Paracelsus, 16th century philosopher, who said the following. He says, "Our uncertainty about ourselves is at the base of our uncertainty of all things." So as long as we don't know ourselves, who we are, what is I, how we function, why we function the way we do, why we want certain things or dislike other things, all these different mechanisms that govern our day and lead us to or away from things on a daily basis, until we know and understand them, he says, we cannot know or understand anything. Which is an important thought because we usually want to understand everything before understanding ourselves. We miss this initial step that is crucial for our learning. And one of the best presentations I know of self-inquiry, self-observation, if you like, which is the chief means of self-study, are the portraits by Rembrandt that actually come from around the same time as Paracelsus, interestingly. Not necessarily related, of course, to each other. This is one of Rembrandt's first portraits. Rembrandt is the painter credited with the most self-portraits that any, let's say, prominent painter ever painted. And from the very beginning of his career, he painted these. You see him as a young man here. He's 23 years old. And one of the many things that has drawn so much attention, especially subsequently after this painter died until today, is not only the good artistry that went into portraying a portrait like this, which is quite realistic, but not in an artificial way, in a very a kind of ingenious way, the way he strokes with the back of his brush to create the hair in different shiny parts in his earlobe and stuff like that. But even more interesting is the fact that the portrait is in the dark. It kind of runs against your expectation of what a portrait should be. Andrash, if it's you asking me about the recording, let's start the recording when the broadcast ends, okay? And then we don't clash. Thank you for reminding me. What do you see? What do you feel? What message do you feel is conveyed in this unusual self-portrait? What emotion do you see? What state do you see in the painter? You can either unmute yourself and share it, or you can share it in the chat option. Hannah, let's begin with you.
Relating it to the quote from Paracelsus, actually what I see is uncertainty. He looks a bit startled, a bit surprised almost to catch himself in the mirror.
Okay, very good. Yes. Something is surprising him. And yet, would you agree, Hannah, he's actually only getting a glimpse of something, right? He's actually not even seeing it that clearly, whatever it is. And yet it startles him, right?
Yes, exactly, because his eyes are in shadow. So just as we can't quite see him, neither would he be able himself to be able to see himself clearly in that shadow.
Good, very good. Thank you, Hannah. Okay, here we are. Yes, Scott is saying naive to discerning or discriminating. Shoaib is seeing astonishment. Yes, just like Hannah says, startled at something surprised him. He didn't expect things to look this way. Krista sees fear and uncertainty. So a combination of fear at what he sees and at the same time not quite clear that he's actually seeing what he suspects he's seeing. Jim sees curiosity, which is nice, Jim, because obviously something in him wants to see, or he wouldn't bother. You know, he'd just stop at the first impulse of fear, which many people do, by the way. Yes, many of us do take a first glimpse, realize something, and then say, "This is not for me." We don't say it, we don't admit it, but in fact, we run away from it. He won't. He will continue painting self-portraits throughout the rest of his life. And so, yes, Jim, I appreciate your observation. Something also evokes curiosity in him. Arjun sees alertness. Shane, shocked and a little overwhelmed. Kelly, eagerness with caution, yet hopeful. Erez caught himself by surprise. Susanna, the surprise of starting to see. And Tamara being caught in the moment. The interesting thing, Tamara, about being caught here is that if somebody else were the photographer, you would understand, you know, that he was caught. He wasn't ready for an embarrassing photo while he was doing something he'd prefer not be photographed. But in this case, he catches himself, which is interesting because it implies we can develop the ability to observe ourselves also in unflattering situations. Yes, this is very important. This is a capacity of the human being that is unique, but that needs to be developed, and that Rembrandt will develop throughout his life. He will live to his 60s. Here he's 23. The capacity to observe ourselves also in states that are not flattering to our imaginary picture of ourselves. Abuzar trying to recognize himself. Thank you. Thank you all. Now, a year later, Rembrandt paints the following self-portrait. And as I show this, I will add the disclaimer that, of course, we are using his portraits to emphasize a certain point. It's not that all of his 23rd year he spent in the dark and all of his 24th year he spent in more light. Of course, there would be ups and downs in any year. But for the sake of this presentation, juxtaposing these two is very helpful because something changes a year later in a very meaningful way. And I'd like to ask you the same question now with this portrait. What has changed? What do you see obviously different than the previous portrait? What's here now?
Intention.
Intention, Gerald, you say, meaning in the previous one, there was more kind of an accident, a surprise, but here he's actually looking for something. Is that what you mean?
Yes, exactly.
Very good, yes. I'd agree with that. Jeremy, are you commenting on the second portrait when you say looking without expectation? Yes? No. The first one?
First one, yeah. The second one, I see more of a concentrated effort.
Yes. Definitely. And also look actually at the full, you notice, look at his torso. There is a slight, now there should be, right? Because if the canvas is over here and the mirror is over, so he has to kind of draw back a little bit, but this drawing back is very symbolic, isn't it? Trying to take a step behind himself and take a candid look at what he sees.
There's also now more light, much more light.
Definitely more light, Krista, yes. Definitely more light to aid his seeing.
For me, I see more confidence or maybe more being distinguished. I know it might be a little bit of a different angle than what you're talking about, but like in the first photograph, he seems almost peeking out at reality and very cautious, as if he hasn't built up his personality. He hasn't put on his armor. And then as he's a little bit older, I don't know that he really looks distinct, I don't see self-realization. I don't think he's realized, but I see more of a false personality where he's distinguished or established, or he's got his persona of, more of a sense of false for me.
Okay, and that's fine, Jason. And what is important is that you could not see this, and this is for all of us. Any observation you have, you could not make it had you not seen the same in yourself. Yes, so really we're using this canvas as a mirror for ourselves. And what is important really, Jason, if you see that for now is true for you. That here he was actually more naked, and I could actually see there's a good argument in what you say. Here he was more naked and therefore fearful, startled, and here he put some kind of a shield that made him seem more confident, but actually is not necessarily a progression. That's fine, Jason, if you want to see it that way. I really should not argue against it, if you see what I mean. It's your truth for now, and it's completely legitimate. On YouTube, Scott is seeing suspicion. Higgs is seeing concern and some preoccupation. Very interesting. Kelly says he's slowed down, more introspective. Aurel, he started to see many things in himself and is cautious not to hurt himself with what he sees. Very interesting, Aurel. Kathleen too sees, like you, Jason, more personality, vanity, as well as there being somehow home now, looking through his eyes. Very nice. Okay, very good. Good. And as I say, Kathleen and Jason and everyone, I cannot say, I cannot, really the best I can say is that this is a mirror into something you will see in yourself and probably have seen, many of you, many times. The juxtaposition is very helpful to flush out these observations. Thank you. I'd like to conclude with a quote, conclude this part with a quote from Gurdjieff, who said, without self-knowledge, without understanding the working and functions of his machine, man cannot be free. He cannot govern himself, and he will always remain as a slave and the plaything of the forces acting upon him. This is why in all ancient teachings, the first demand at the beginning of the way to liberation was know thyself. Thank you very much for your participation, Christian. We can stop the broadcast now.